applying on behalf of an entity must also provide the following proof: documentation of the ownership of the entity, and 2, documentation demonstrating that 60% of the entity's ownership have been individuals of the state of Arkansas for 7 years prior to the application. Documentation sufficient to satisfy this requirement shall be the same as required of an individual in subsections D. Documentation providing that each of the entity's owners, board members, and officers are over the age of 21. Documentation sufficient to satisfy this requirement shall be the same as required of an individual in subsections B and C, and consents for criminal background checks for each owners, board members, and officers of this entity.
I think one of the things we ought to require is we ought to require a certificate of good standing for the entity and have them submit that with the application.
Did you have a comment?
Commissioner Story, that is actually also included in section 9 on what I have marked as cultivation facility, page 9, in conjunction with some of Commissioner Carroll's questions earlier about financial stability, is that certificate of good standing from the Secretary of State as well as DFA.
Did you say something?
What page did you say?
For me, it's marked as cultivation facilities 5, but it's under section 9, under the selection process, the components addressing questions of merit, and it's in 9.4, proof of financial stability and access, and in that is statements of good standing from the Secretary of State and DFA.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that.
If the commissioners want to move that around later as you work on how you are addressing that application, we can move it around, but it is in there and it is something considered necessary for an entity as we drafted this as an example.
Okay. And C, the information and documents should be submitted in a method prescribed by the commission in the notice of open application.
What do I mean prescribed? I would assume that just means they're going to send the information in with their application.
Maybe electronically,
Electronic,
or,
that's right.
you know, remember I talked about that electronic submission y'all don't want to do, but electronically form scanned, faxed, you know, people talk about, you know, do they have to come in and sign it in front of you? I don't know.
No, typically they're just notarized.
Notarized, yeah, notarization.
Is this where we would have some kind of documentation showing the financial stability, either posting of a bond or putting money in an escrow account or something like that?
That's under 9, I think. the merit.
That's under the section that Mr. DePickle, did you? That
Yes,
was-
ma'am, that is part of what is currently under section 9, which is part of that potential criteria for merit base as one of the options. Once that initial hurdle in 4 and 5 is met of, okay, as Mary Robin described it, that's enough to get you in the door, then these other requirements would go to how they're scored, how they are evaluated, whether they have that financial capacity, whether they have the business acumen, whether they have those other components that you're seeking.
Well, don't you think we'd want to have that almost as beginning one of?
You faded out. Could you say that again?
Well, I was just saying, it seems to me that we want those as one of the one of the initial requirements versus necessarily when we got on down to merit-based.
We want to see that up front before we started making a decision based on merit. Is his point.
I
That-
agree with you.
That's how I've seen it
Yeah.
in the past as well.